The court case presiding over the murder of Lenny Small by George Milton will now begin.
Defending George Milton because it was morally and ethically correct for him to kill his friend Lenny Small. In being his brother's keeper, the defendant helped keep his friend from a more gruesome death at the hands of Curley and Carlson.
I'm defending Lenny Small, and I would like to preface my words with the idea that we are our brother's keeper. George's decision to kill Lenny was rash and wasn't well thought out. George was responsible for Lenny, and he should have considered this before he went on and killed him.
At the time which this crime took place, the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression, there were only 32 public mental health hospitals in the United States, all being over 50 years old. These facilities were put in place to treat and monitor people with severe mental disabilities that kept them from functioning in society. Mr. Small would never have been admitted into one of these facilities, seeing as though with the help of my client, the defendant, George Milton, and his aunt Clara, he was able to function in society. Despite the many difficulties that came with caring for Mr. Small, my client stuck with the man he had no kinship or immediate relationship with, protecting him as if he were a younger brother. When the two famished gypsies walked onto the Salinas Valley Ranch a day late, they never realized it would be the place where their lives would be forever altered. In meeting everybody later on, it was apparent that the son of the boss, Curley, was not fond of Lenny. My client, Mr. Milton, did all he could to protect Mr. Small from Curley, but it was not enough. In efforts to keep and protect Mr. Small from Curley, Mr. Milton could not protect Mr. Small from himself. And in a moment of pure panic, Mr. Small accidentally killed the wife of Curley. In learning about these events, Mr. Milton had no choice but to protect a man who was like a brother to him, in essence breaking the law, or to tell the men where to find his friend. Knowing these men were not going to allow Mr. Small to live, and that they were going to draw out the suffering of a man who did not comprehend the error of his ways, the defendant did the only humane thing he could do. In a moment of pure serenity, he shot a man that was like his brother in the back of the head, saving him from the pain that would come along with a gruesome and drawn-out death. I asked the jury to look at Mr. Milton's killing of his friend as the only humane thing to do, and to recognize that if they too were put in a position to save someone as close to them as a brother from a pain much worse than death, they would too. Thank you.
Yay!
By killing Lenny, George lost the job that he had as Lenny's keeper. And by taking him with him on his journeys, the responsibility of taking care of Lenny and watching over him was laid on his shoulders. He chose that responsibility, and so he needed to fulfill it. This responsibility that George had went beyond getting him to a ranch and getting him hired, but it went to watching over him and being aware of where he was and what he was doing. This was George's decision and not Lenny's. It was also George's decision to go into town and leave Lenny alone on the ranch. Lenny's mental disability had caused problems in the past in this regard, and it was George's job to learn from that mistake, not Lenny's. We all know of Lenny's memory disability, and it is George's job to be looking out for him. We're all aware that Lenny's memory isn't the best, and George should have been there to help him learn from the experiences that he has had. A simple yet significant reason that George isn't innocent in this trial is in the trust among the ranch workers, and specifically George and Lenny. In the article series, The Harvest Gypsies by John Steinbeck talks about how the families helped each other out even though less people may have been easier on them. When someone was sick or dying, they went to extensive measures to help them, and they didn't just give up on that person, even though that might have made it easier on everyone else. The trust was also evident on the ranch that George and Lenny were working at, especially with Slim. Slim gained the trust from all the other workers and George had that trust from Lenny. There were a few examples when George and the trust relationship between them was displayed. The first one was when they first arrived at the ranch and had their interview with the boss. Lenny made the small mistake of talking, but George covered for him right away because he had his back. Lenny was able to trust George to get him out of the messes that he got himself into, unintentionally. The second example is the story of Lenny jumping in the lake. George told this story about how he and his friends and Lenny were sitting by a lake, and out of fun, he told Lenny to jump into the lake. Lenny didn't know how to swim, but despite this, he jumped in because he trusted George and he knew that he'd be okay. The final example was towards the end of Lenny's life, right before George killed him. When they were sitting on the banks of the Salinas River, George again relayed the dream that they had of living on the farm together and escaping all this madness that they were in. Lenny loved to hear the story, and he felt a spark of hope as George relayed the story. But as George concluded the story, he shot Lenny and killed that spark of hope that he had ignited within him. George is guilty. Go.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I would like to ask you why it is more humane to kill an animal, to put an animal out of its misery, or potential misery, but not a human. For my witness, I would like to call Candy to the stand. State your name for the record, please.
Candy.
Candy, prior to the killing of Mr. Small, what personal sadness did you go through?
I went through many forms. I went through grief because my dog had died. It had been shot.
And who shot your dog?
Carlson, I believe, but a few people were definitely for it.
And why did these men want to shoot or put your dog down?
Well, I guess he wasn't doing what he used to. He wasn't herding the sheep and animals like he used to herd them, and he sure as hell wasn't running as fast as he used to.
So, would you say he could have been in pain?
He could have been in pain. You know, I can't talk to him, but I believe that's why I was so conflicted. It might have been the right thing to do.
And Candy, where were you when Carlson and Curly found out about Curly's dead wife? Were you with them?
I was with them.
And what were the two men's feeling about this?
They were shocked, of course, and extremely upset.
Angry?
Angry. I definitely got that feeling from them.
So when the two men left that night of Mrs. Curly's murder, would you say they were looking for revenge?
That's definitely the word I would use to describe what they were looking for.
Oh, hell no!
Is it also true that Curly said exactly, "I'm going for my shotgun. I'll kill the son of a bitch myself"?
That is what he said, I believe.
Theoretically, would you say they were going to lynch Mr. Small?
Theoretically, I don't really know what they were going to do to him, but it wouldn't have been pretty. I'm just glad I didn't see it.
So by killing Mr. Small, would you say Mr. Milton did what was done for your dog and put him out of misery that was going to be imposed on him in the near future?
Yes, I do believe so.
Thank you. You may sit down.
You're welcome.
For my witness, I'd like to call up Lenny Small. So, Lenny, who is your best friend?
My best friend is George.
Why is he your best friend? What did he do for you?
He would always take care of me, and he was awful nice.
So you'd say you would trust him.
I do trust him.
Would you also say that he protects you?
He always protected me. I mean, I never got hurt around George.
So what was your dream?
My dream just was to be with George and be happy on a ranch with lots of rabbits.
Keep going.
So would you say you're ever going to achieve this dream?
Think so, yes.
So you'd say George will help you achieve this dream?
George will always help me,
How do you know that?
because he will always protect me, and he loves me, and I love him.
Would you say that you trust George with your life?
I trust George with everything, especially my life.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I would like to conclude my argument by saying George Milton was his brother's keeper. He protected Lenny. He protected Lenny from a really gruesome death. Wouldn't you do anything to protect your siblings, your brothers, your sisters? That's exactly what George Milton did for Lenny. Thank you.
We are our brother's keeper, but it doesn't exactly mean that we take each other out of pain by putting him in more pain. George was responsible for Lenny as he chose to keep him close. Lenny offered to leave George at the moment and go live in a cave by himself, but George would not allow it because he was his friend. This decision that George made placed the burden onto George's shoulders, taking it off of Lenny's. But despite this, George gave up on Lenny. The trust that Lenny had in George, the trust and the friendship, was swallowed up along with the snake, to be forgotten forever in the belly of a crane.